So, as I have promised before, today's topic of discussion are the shapes of indifference curves. Basically, I'll be talking about indifference curves which do not follow a particular default shape, and we'll essentially be talking about the exceptions to the properties of indifference curves that we have discussed before. So, as I mentioned in my previous video, I had said that indifference curves are always downward sloping. So, as I move from left to right, my indifference curves move downwards. So, they are downward sloping. And almost all indifference curves are convex to the origin. So, these default indifference curves are always bulged towards the origin. So, we essentially have indifference curves which look like this. So as you can see from the diagram, indifference curves are generally, or as I've mentioned here, always, which is essentially an exaggeration. They are always downward sloping and they are convex to the origin. But today we'll be trying to find out cases where it might not be the same. So let's take a story. What happens is I consider a hypothetical educational institution which offers 2 courses to every student. The first course that they offer is a career-oriented course. So this might be the subject that you want to pursue your dreams as, so that might be a career subject. And they give an extracurricular course or a hobby subject. So that is for your breaks and for having fun with life. Now, for example, you might be wondering why I'm taking this. So let's say you want to be an economist. So that would make economics as your career subject. And if you're kind of interested in music, so that might be your hobby subject. So you might have music as your hobby subject and economics as your career subject. Or you might have, I don't know, maybe you want to be an artist as a career option. So you might take art as your career subject, and you are really interested in learning about history. So history might be your hobby subject. So it depends upon you. I leave that up to you. So these are the 2 subjects that you have in your educational institution. So that's a career subject C and a hobby subject H. Now, indifference curve being on a 2-dimensional plane, there must be something that you want to plot on the XY plane. So this is my XY plane and I want to plot something. So what is the most obvious thing or object that I can plot regarding these 2 subjects on my XY plane? So that would be marks. So let's say every month you give an examination on these 2 subjects. And what I do is I plot marks of, let's say I plot the marks of C. So that's my career subject. So I plot the marks of career subject on my horizontal axis. And I plot the marks of my hobby subject on my vertical axis. So these are the 2 axes that I have on my 2-dimensional plane. Now, what I want to do is, my objective is to plot different points which will represent marks that I get in my career subject and marks that I get in my hobby subject. And what I want to do is I want to draw I want to prepare an indifference map pertaining to the marks obtained in these 2 subjects. So what I'll do is, let's say I get some amount of marks in career subject C and some other amount of marks in a hobby subject H. I will try to find out another point which will give me the same amount of utility that I get when I get those amounts of marks from the subject C and H. So let's say one fine morning, I was very prepared with both my subjects, and I got, let's say, a 15 out of 20 in my hobby subject, and I got 15 out of 30 in my career subject. So this point would represent my position in the XY plane. So I get 15 marks in my hobby subject and I get 15 marks in my career subject. And I'm pretty happy with it. I'm like assigning 10 units of satisfaction to this point, this allotment of marks that I have. The next day, I don't know, maybe I was very happy and I had a little bit too much of ice cream. So I had a sore throat. And what I did is I was prepared with economics. I did study quite nicely the previous day. So I was still good with economics. So I did get 15 out of, I did I take economics as my career subject? Oh, well, let's say I took economics as my career subject. So I was pretty prepared with my career subject, and I still got 15 out of 30 in my career subject. But due to my sore throat, instead of getting 15, I got 5 in my hobby subject. So that gives me a 15 out of 30 in my career subject and a 5 out of 20 in my hobby subject. So that would make me come to this position. Now, what I want to find out is what is the position of this point with respect to this point if I get a utility of 10 units from this combination of marks for the two subjects with respect to an indifference map. So how happy am I when I'm considering this point with respect to this point? So when I go home, I think that, I want to build up my career with my career subject C, and I really want to become something good at it. On the other hand, my hobby subject is simply a pastime for me. So just so that I do not, die out of burden of studying, I just take hobby subject H as a pastime, to have fun. So it doesn't necessarily mean that I need to score well in my hobby subject. I really need to score well in my career subject, not necessarily my hobby subject. So if I get 15 marks in hobby subject and if I get 5 marks in my hobby subject, it doesn't necessarily give me a different amount of utility. So what I realize when I think that night is, if I get 15 marks in career and 15 marks in hobby, and I get 10 units of utility from that, I might get the same amount of utility if I get 15 marks in career and 5 marks in hobby. So that won't make me feel any worse. It will still give me the same amount of utility. So well, an indifference curve essentially is a curve that plots the different points or the different allocations that make me equally happy. So what I'm saying is, if these 2 points make me equally happy, then these 2 points can essentially lie on the same indifference curve. So that is what I mean when I say the point 15, 15 and the point 5. Yeah, and the point 15, 5, they lie on the same indifference curve. They make me equally happy. So getting 15 marks in career and 5 marks in hobby gives me the same amount of utility as getting 15 marks in career and 15 marks in hobby. Why does that happen? This is because, well, let's say career is my normal good. So that's how we define it. It's a good that satisfies all the properties of a good. We'll discuss more about it in our future videos. So that's a default way of saying normal good. And for hobby, what happens is I'm not essentially depending my utility on this good. So whether I become more happy or not does not essentially depend on this good. So these kinds of goods are called neutral goods. So if I am consuming some amount of neutral good and some amount of normal good, changing the amount of neutral good only will not make me shift from one indifference curve to the other. So if I get 20 marks in my hobby subject and if I get 0 marks in my hobby subject, it doesn't essentially matter to me. What matters is how much marks I get in my normal good. In this case, the career subject, or well, I mentioned economics at one point of time. So my career subject, economics. Another point that you need to notice is, since C is a normal good, this normal good C satisfies the non-satiety property. So if I keep on increasing the amount of normal good here, career subject, that is the marks obtained in my career subject, I will move to a higher indifference curve. So let's say the next day I study a little harder and I get 25 out of 30 in economics. That is my career subject. That will essentially push me to a higher indifference curve. So if this indifference curve represents 10 units of satisfaction, then this indifference curve might represent, 20 units of satisfaction. So having more of the marks obtained in my career subject gives me more amount of satisfaction, gives me more amount of utility. But having more marks in my neutral good, that is having more marks in my hobby subject, does not make me happy. That is why it's called a neutral good. If you reduce the consumption of a neutral good, or if you increase the consumption of a neutral good, it does not change your utility. Moreover, you can derive from what I said, neutral goods do not satisfy the non-satiety property. So for neutral goods, more is not necessarily better. It's not worse, but it's not even better. So whether you increase or decrease the amount of neutral good consumed, it doesn't matter. So another property that you can derive from here is, let's say we have, let's just draw, yeah. Let's say we had a normal XY plane. Yes, my horizontal, my vertical axis is not necessarily vertical, it's kind of slanted, but ignore that. So let's say we had a normal form of indifference curve, and if I had discussed before that if you reduce the consumption of, where I have normal goods on both sides, need not say, if I reduce the consumption of good on the y-axis, in order to stay on the same indifference curve, I need to compensate myself by increasing the amount of good x. So if I reduce the consumption of good y, I need to increase the consumption of good x in order to compensate the loss in utility due to the loss in the amount of good y consumed. That is what essentially allows me to stay on the same indifference curve. But if you come to the diagram that I have here, when I'm decreasing the marks obtained in my hobby subject, I need not compensate myself with an increasing mark in normal good. So if I get 15 marks and the next day, as I mentioned in my story, I got less marks, I got 5 out of 20 in my neutral good. In order to be equally happy, I did not need to score more marks in my career subject. I was still happy with 15 marks. So that is another property of neutral good, the fact that you need not compensate a loss in a neutral good with an increase in the normal good. So this is the shape of the indifference curve when you have neutral good on a vertical axis. So when you have neutral goods on vertical axis, you essentially end up with vertical indifference curves, where the amount of x is essentially the deciding factor of the amount of utility that you achieve. So that's what you have when you have neutral goods on the vertical axis. Now let's say, as I took career subject on my horizontal axis and hobby subject on my vertical axis. So what I do is, I can obviously have career subject on my vertical axis as well and hobby subject on my horizontal axis as well. So since I have already discussed what are neutral goods and what are normal goods in sense, so I can obviously say that this is my axis for normal good, and the horizontal axis is my axis for measuring neutral good. So yeah, now as I have already discussed, if I have vertical axis plotting neutral goods, my indifference curves are vertical. So what I will find out now is, what is the shape of the indifference curve if I have neutral goods on the horizontal axis. So this will be easier. What happens is, if I get 10 marks in normal goods, so if I have 10 marks in career subject and 5 marks in hobby subject, I end up with this amount of utility. And as I mentioned before, if I get 10 marks in my career subject and if I get 20 marks in my hobby subject, I end up with the same amount of utility. So naturally, in this case, I will have a horizontal indifference curve. So now you know that if you have neutral good on your vertical axis, you end up with a vertical indifference curve, and if you have, and vice versa basically. So yeah,